Jonathan, thanks so much for joining me today on the Mark Divine Show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, so we got a lot to talk about, but I always start with, wanting to give whoever's listening who may not be familiar with you just a little bit of a background. Like, where are you from, and what were some of the formative, influences in your life that led you down this path to be, all about awakening enlightenment, both for your own journey and also teaching others.
Well, I think, like with most people, it starts with some kind of pain in one's life. And I was blessed to have a pretty dysfunctional family. So, so
I like the way you say that, by the way, because
well,
it's taken me a long time to be blessed about my dysfunctional family. So,
well, that got me because I didn't have control over that. I kind of had my midlife crisis at age 12. Where I became like
wow.
suicidally depressed, and I looked to self-help books or anything to help me out of that. And that led to
Hmm.
learning about hypnosis. And then by age 13, I was meditating every day. So
Great. Wow.
that's how I got started. And as I started to feel better, I was looking to see who are the happiest people on earth, and I saw that was enlightened people or people who are very awake. So I got into the
Hmm.
habit of finding them out, stalking them, and interviewing them. And I've interviewed everybody now from late Mother Teresa and Ram Dass and Wayne Dyer to the Dalai Lama and Deepak Chopra.
No kidding. Now, how did that come about? I mean, you didn't like call the Dalai Lama as a 15-year-old. I mean, that must have been a little later in your life. Give us a little bit more detail on the path,
Well, it did
the
happen
professional path.
later,
'Cause-
but
yeah.
I realized that if you're going to be persistent in an area that might you might learn something useful. So, in
Right.
fact, as a 30-year-old, I literally found a number for the Sisters of Charity in India and called that, thinking somebody there might know how to connect with Mother Teresa. Well,
Right.
amazing story. I called, and this woman answers the phone. I tell her, "Hey, I want to interview Mother Teresa," and the woman says, "Yeah, this is Ma." I said, "Ma, do you know
That's
Mother Teresa?" And
awesome.
she says, "This is Ma." I said, "Your mother? You picked up the freaking phone?" You know,
That's awesome.
back in
Of course she did.
1990, calling a number in India and having Mother Teresa answer would be like calling a random number now and having somebody on the space station answer. So and during that conversation, she said, I asked her, "Well, how do you meditate?" And she said, "Well, I don't really meditate, but the Dalai Lama knows a lot about meditation. Would you like his phone number?" And I said, "Yeah."
Right.
So I think when you try to
That's awesome.
serve a higher mission, I was trying to find out like the greatest hits of how people can connect with peace and love within. And when you are
Hmm.
willing to commit to a mission like that, that helps other people, I think grace can be very helpful. And a lot of miracles have
I
happened
agree.
along the way.
Yeah. And one of the first points you make in your book is that the student must be ready, right? And when the student's ready, then the teacher appears. I mean, what does that mean to you? Like, what was your readiness? I know you said it started from pain and then a seeking. So is it recognition that things aren't working and then seeking an answer? Is that when the student is ready?
Yeah. And of course, there's different levels of readiness. I think
Right.
that having the intention to learn, like you really want to learn
Hmm.
something, is really important, more important than who you pick
Hmm.
as a teacher. A
Hmm.
story
That's
that
right.
comes to mind is many years ago, I was leading a movie group of profound movies. I'd show profound movies to this group. And one week I wasn't going to be there. So I thought I gave the movie Gandhi to a friend to show to this group, but it was actually the movie Men in Black 2. Have you seen that movie?
I don't. I think I might have a long time ago.
Well,
Yeah,
Men in Black 1,
I remember Men in Black, and I'm sure I saw Men in Black too, and it
uh,
was probably underwhelming to me. But
Men in Black 1 and Men in Black 3 were pretty good movies, but Men in Black 2 is very bad. So, anyways, these people are used to seeing a profound movie from me and they're watching Men in Black 2. And then they write about it and they say, "Oh, this was so profound. It was life changing." Their intention to find something profound and learn something was was more impactful than the actual inanity of the movie. And I think,
Right.
if you're really hungry to learn and grow, your dog can be your teacher, or your child, or the person down the
Mhm.
street. So that's
Mhm.
why when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, because if you're really ready, everybody's a teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. And every situation, right? I
Yeah,
agree with that.
yeah.
I wanna get into, like, paths and processes or, practices. So I know you've got a lot of different experiences and also the difference between a practice or a sadhana and a religion, right?
Mhm.
Because there's a distinct difference there. But let's just first discuss what is enlightenment mean to you, and also what's the difference or distinction between awakening and enlightenment. And I'm curious, because words kind of contract, like words do not do justice. As soon as you name something, then you limit it in a sense of what the essence is. And so these words, awakening and enlightening, are similar. It contracts meaning, and it means something different to practically everyone. So
Right.
what is your take on the two?
That's very true. Well, I like Adyashanti's definition. When I interviewed him, he said that enlightenment is seeing the world without the lens of the ego. And I think we've all
Hmm.
had a moments of that, where you're looking at a sunset, or you're making love with someone, and your ego's not there. So
Hmm.
it's not that people don't ever have those moments, but enlightenment means that you're living in that all the time.
Right.
Awakening means that you're in the process of having more and more of those moments. And
Right.
hopefully, you're doing some practice that helps you to have more of those moments. In the Enlightenment Project book, I try to list like the greatest hits of what science has shown leads to more of these moments, and leads to sometimes
Hmm.
persistent enlightenment, which is possible in this
Hmm.
lifetime.
Right. Yeah, what's coming to me right now is a recent conversation I had with Dr. Tony Nader, who runs the TM organization now. And his recent book, The Unbounded Ocean of Consciousness, he describes 7 stages of consciousness.
Mhm,
And the first 3 are normal, right? Waking, dreaming, or sleeping, dreaming, and waking. And then the fourth stage is really what you're talking about with awakening. It's the recognition that there is this more ephemeral way of being with the self that is beyond thoughts, and what you described as ego. And ego would be like the thinking, analyzing, rational,
mhm,
judging, projecting mind. And that's only the fourth out of 7, right? So then the fifth would be probably the early stage of what most would consider enlightenment. And that is a persistent stabilization in that awakened state, which is what you described as enlightenment. And then the sixth is beginning to recognize the oneness in all other beings.
mhm.
And then the seventh is basically everything becomes an energetic state of bliss,
Yeah, yeah.
which is fascinating. And I think those higher stages are very rare, but the fourth and the fifth stages are actually somewhat, I mean, they're very accessible. And and I think you're right. Many people have had that fourth stage of, hey, you know, and you might even equate that to like being in a radical flow state, or that moment of when you're handed the newborn baby or the
Mhm,
sunset, and all time just stops, and you're in that stillness of just being purely present in that now moment.
mhm.
So what is your experience with these concepts?
Well, I've tried to find what are the methods that I can do in the shortest period of time that will raise my consciousness the most. And I
Okay,
think
I like
people
that.
don't realize that the method.
Classic American, right? We want to take the shortest path to the greatest results.
I admit it. I admit it. So that's why I interviewed 100 spiritual teachers, because I noticed that the technology for getting to these higher states has gotten better. A lot of people are using methods from 2,000 years ago, but they wouldn't even
Right.
think of using a computer from 20 years ago. So the methods
That's fascinating.
I find are getting a lot better. And so I
Right.
tried to give my favorite 30 or so in the Enlightenment Project book, um, and I can even talk about some of those methods. A lot of them just
I'd love.
take like 20 seconds, and I can get into
Mhm,
a fifth state or even sometimes a sixth state of consciousness. And
mhm,
I think
mhm,
a lot of people don't realize that how close they are if they can find a
mhm.
technique that works for them. And different things work for different
Right.
people.
Yeah. One of my favorite spiritual teachers is a guy named Sri Nazagrata, if I say it right, Maharaj.
Uh-huh.
And he his work is just sublime, and he talks about this idea that you just articulated, that it's really not something that's out there requiring 20 years of meditation. It literally is like right here, right now, and it just requires a letting go or a surrendering
Hmm.
of you know of your attachment to the mind and the body. And this is so he's like Ramana Maharshi's path of just really studying the nature of I am.
Hmm.
And also by looking at the opposite of I am not that and I am not that. I'm not this body and I'm not those thoughts and I'm not this identity and I'm not this, these credentials on the wall, and I'm not this bag of emotions. And if I'm not all that, then what am I?
Right.
Right. And they consider that to be the most direct path. And that's become my path because it really doesn't require any mantras or any special concentration techniques or mindfulness. It's just the complete surrendering to the absolute present moment and asking, who am I?
Hmm.
And so in that moment, I guess my point is you recognize that this isn't really some crazy, like super special. I mean, it is, but the specialness is in its simplicity,
Yes. And
experience of enlightenment.
And when you let go of the grabbing or the tendencies of the ego, what's left is
Right,
a place of spacious peace and open heartedness. And
right,
if people realize how easy it is to get there, instead of this model that I must do X, Y, and Z for 20 years before I can experience it,
right,
I think more people would experience it. And that's why I'm trying to put out these really greatest hits methods to as large audience as possible, because I think the
right.
world will only change when enough people are experiencing persistent peace.
Yeah, I agree with that. I 100% in alignment with that. And in fact, that's our mission here, is to scale consciousness, which we can do for the first time that we're aware of because of the communication technologies we have, such as this podcast,
Hmm.
and such as the broad distribution of books through like yours through Amazon and whatnot. And we also have this growing sense that consciousness is, and the vibration of the planet is also evolving quickly,
Yeah.
right? And that would be supported by the yogic philosophy of coming out of the Kali Yuga and entering kind of a higher state of energetic consciousness based upon kind of our galactic positioning in the universe, which is fascinating but more philosophical, I say. So now, in the beginning, what paths did you explore that maybe you found useful and then later abandoned? I'm curious.
Well, I wouldn't say I ever abandoned a path. It's like a bicycle wheel with a lot of spokes. On the surface, you
Right.
could
Yeah.
say that Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam are all different on the surface, very different. But if you travel down that
Hmm.
spoke, they lead to the same
Hmm.
hub of an open
Hmm.
hearted, loving, peaceful person with clear seeing. So I
Hmm.
got bar mitzvahed. I was born Jewish. I spent six
Hmm.
months in a Christian monastery, 6 months in a Hindu monastery, 6 months in a Buddhist
Oh, wow.
monastery. And then I spent 15 years with a Gurdjieff teacher. So I have a lot of respect for the different traditions. And I think at different times, different things worked for me or were the next step. I'm a pretty intellectual guy. So exploring Christianity, which is really a devotional religion, was very,
Hmm.
interesting and growing for me. Um,
Hmm.
so and now, because of the internet, all these great techniques are out there. A lot of the best techniques I put in the book have only been invented in the last 3 years. just like the best iPhone has only been invented in the last 3 years.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I think really our mission, should we decide to accept it, is to keep asking, what do I want now in terms of my spiritual growth, and what would work for me really well now? Because what worked for you 10 years ago might not be the thing that does it for you today. I did TM, I've done Zen meditation, I've done yoga,
Mhm.
but now I do a very simple meditation which has been very powerful. Is I made a list of everybody I've ever loved in my life, and I spend 1 minute
Mhm.
focusing on thinking
Mhm.
what I love about them and then sending them love. So you do that for 40 or
Nice.
50 people, you feel like totally engulfed in love. Well, there's no better
Mhm.
vibration than feeling total love. So, these are really
Yes.
simple methods, but they can be very powerful.
I got my start in Zen as well, and I found it to be useful because of the structure and the teacher who was also my martial arts master, 10th degree. I was, just a pure blessing that he was also a Zen master. I don't think I would have found Zen if I hadn't. But I was the student who was ready, and that's what I needed. And so then I studied everything I could about Zen, right? And then when I got into yoga after reading Paramahansa Yogananda's autobiography of Yogi, and then Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and going deep into the philosophy and the meditation practices and 1,000 hours of yoga training, then I kind of transferred from Zen and the rigidity of that into more of a yogic 8 limb practice. And what I found useful about those, although I agree with you 100% that there are really profound techniques that are coming out today that are maybe more like direct paths or even hacks. I hate that term. But what I found useful personally about those more traditional lineage paths is that there was a lot of um, insightful teachers
Yeah.
who could help you along the way. Right. And so, like, you go have the interview with the Zen master, and he can point out where you're gone off path or where your ego's gotten involved, or, and then he could prescribe, or she could prescribe maybe some shifts in your sadhana or your practice. And I think that that's what's a little bit missing in kind of the American approach of like, hey, try this hack or this app or, this variation. And you could be missing kind of that erudite and wise kind of what used to be a guru relationship where they can help customize and,
Mhm.
and guide you. What do
Well,
you think?
I actually agree with you. Not everybody has access to those teachers or has the time. I actually lived
True.
with my
Mhm.
teacher for 18 years in the same
Wow.
house.
No kidding.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Is that the, you called the, I didn't recognize the term. You said Gurkha,
No,
was,
well,
or
his
not
name
Gurkha?
is,
Was that
is, is Justin Gold. And he's an
okay?
American, but American spiritual master, and allowed very close access to him, which totally changed
Mhm.
my life. So, that's one of the things that helped me to know the value of having a guru, but not everybody has access like that. But everybody can
Right.
have access to their wisdom, either through YouTube
Hmm.
videos, or I share my favorite guru stories because I've met pretty much all of
Hmm.
them, or not
Hmm.
all of them, but a lot of them in the book. And there is something to having a mentor who can watch over you and give you help, advice, guidance that is very hard to do for yourself. So I think
Right.
that is an important ingredient.
Yeah. And at the same time, and I will kind of play devil's advocate to my own kind of line of thinking. Ultimately, it's what the yogis would call the sad guru, which is the ultimate guru, right?
Mhm.
Which is your internal guide, your inner voice. And so eventually you need to turn away from the other as the guru and turn inward to listen to your own sad guru. So the quicker you can find that, I guess the better off you would be, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, my guru was fortunate. I was appreciative of him that after 18 years, he said, "You're done. Go out on your own."
Time to leave the nest. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So let's talk about like experience, because most people listening, if they haven't, or maybe they're not sure, if they've had an enlightenment, they might say, "Well, yeah, I remember a flow state, but that didn't feel like awakening."
Uh-huh.
What is the experience like for you or for those that you've interviewed? Like, what does it mean, suddenly before an awakening experience and after? Because something shifts
Yeah.
permanently after an awakening experience. So, what does that feel like? What's that experience like?
Well, the more you awaken, the less identified you are with your ego, and the more
Hmm.
identified you are with what could either be called your soul or pure awareness or pure
Hmm.
love. So, highly
Hmm.
awakened people, they realize they have a body, but they don't feel identified with that body. They feel identified that like they just got here, like I'm a open-hearted awareness that just arrived here. It's almost like a newborn
Yeah.
child. And in
Right.
fact, one of the ways you can kind of tune into that is imagine you were just born, you're an alien being that just walked into a human body. You don't really know what anything
Hmm.
means. You're just looking at the sensations and the sights. You're an awareness, and
Hmm.
and when you don't identify with the thoughts and the emotions, but you're identifying as just a pure open awareness, that's that's what I'm calling moments of enlightenment. And some people actually
Hmm.
live in that state. I don't, but more and more, gradually, uh,
Hmm.
more and more, I don't so much identify with the character of Jonathan. He's a useful tool.
Right.
He can do
Right.
podcasts, he can speak, but um,
Yeah.
the one that I really appreciate is my true nature, which is a loving awareness.
Right. In pure awareness, I think a lot of people have this fear that they're going to lose something, right?
Yeah, you
Because
you do.
this identity is so, yeah, you do lose something, but it's not, you gain a lot more, I guess, is in where I was going to go with this, right?
Yeah, you
You lose the attachment to the body and the thoughts and the identities, but what you gain is so much more.
Yeah, so you lose some of your attachment to your neuroses and you gain a lot more
Hmm.
love and peace. I think it's a pretty
I
good
love that.
deal.
Yeah.
It's a good exchange.
It's a good trade off. And there's a Japanese term which always inspired me, shibumi, and especially when, as a martial artist, and I'm a lifetime martial artist and yogi, it's effortless perfection.
Hmm.
And to me, when you're in a state of pure awareness, that's really what activates flow.
Mm.
And because flow is this effortless perfection, right? Things just are spontaneously coming out of you, and you feel like you're not even in control. It's just happening. And typically we talk about flow in the context of an expert who's really mastered a particular skill, like the advanced martial artist or the skateboarder or something. But it can happen with anything or any skill, and you don't even need to be an expert. It's just being in that state of pure awareness, where time stops,
Yeah.
and and your relationship to space also changes, right?
Well, there's two
And that's
ways
why
to
you
get
can
to these
feel
things.
it can feel much more richer, like the experience gets really thick, and it's almost like everything is just this one kind of holographic projection emanating from a central point within you. That's been my experience.
And there's two
And I don't know,
ways
I just want to share that, so that's how I do.
there's two
Go ahead.
ways to get to those experiences. One might be through sports where you're having a wonderful, amazing tennis match and you're so in the moment. But you can't
Right.
always do that. So the great thing is through meditation or some techniques that take as little as 5 seconds when you get good at them, you can tap into that flow as you're walking to your car or really
Hmm.
anything, because that state, that experience is in you. It can be
Hmm.
triggered externally sometimes, but better that it be triggered internally so that you can have it during almost any moment during your day.
Right. And I want to get into some of these techniques that you've uncovered, but my experience in teaching these things, first off, there's two things. One is people are really distracted, and so they find that they don't have time. They don't think they have time. And so I recommend, short little practices during the day, which I call spot drills. I also really recommend that people bookend their day with a longer practice of some sorts just to really begin to retrain their mind. Because this is really what we're talking about is mental training.
Yeah.
Yoga is this, is the science of training the mind for reintegration. And and I find that a lot of people resist that because again, their mind has been trained to be really distracted and also outwardly grasping. And so just turning within is a challenge. So that's the first challenge is people don't think they have the time and also their mind is really distracted. And so they have difficulty sitting and doing some sort of dedicated practice, like a yoga or sitting on a bench and meditating.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing is I found is that many people aren't ready, and so they're physiologically agitated, they're out of balance, they're burned out, they're unhealthy, and so they require some preparatory work. And I think you even address this. Like it's really important to get your body healthy,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to get your brain healthy, get your sleep dialed in, all these things, so that then you can begin the process of turning within to find the stillness, which is where the awareness is found. What do you think about those two themes? Have you um,
Well, you're right.
had
One
similar experiences?
one way I look at it is what is your weakest link that's keeping you down? Because a lot of these
Hmm.
gurus say that bliss, love, and peace is your natural state. And that if you're
Right.
not experiencing a lot of that, it means that there's something in the way, there's some obstacle. So,
Hmm.
it might be your body is not in shape, or it might be that your mind is out of control and thinking negatively, or it might be that
Hmm.
you have some trauma that you had in your past that you have to
Right.
more resolve. Or it might be that you just don't have the proper technique or mind training, or you might have a wrong
Hmm.
idea. You might think that you have to do 30 years of something before you can experience your true nature. One wrong idea or one wrong belief, that you're a sinner and that you're a bad person. All these things can
Right.
interfere with you experiencing your true nature. You know, um, and
Hmm.
sometimes a really simple technique can make a huge difference. I'll give you a story of when I was interviewing these 100 spiritual leaders. I was surprised at how often they mentioned that gratitude was a doorway to higher consciousness
Hmm.
and even God. So I became focused
Hmm.
on, okay, what about gratitude? Well, I happen to be pretty lazy, so I don't like to keep a gratitude journal. But a friend of mine went to India and he came back and he was filled with gratitude and filled with joy. As I said, what happened? And he said, well, my guru gave me a magical mantra for feeling gratitude all the time. And I said, well, what's the mantra? 'Cause I want the best, tools. And he said, you got to go to India and get it directly from the guru. So,
Oh,
have you been
that's amazing.
to India, Mark?
Not yet.
Uh,
No,
Well, it's a long
it's on
way
my list, of
away,
course.
but I went
It's a
all the way
long way
over
away.
there,
Exactly.
and I travel
To get your
18,000
spiritual
miles, and then
mantra.
I take a rickshaw for 3 hours. I'm jet lagged and worn out, but I finally get a chance to talk to this guy, and I say, "What's your magical mantra for feeling gratitude?" And in a deep Indian accent, he says, "Ah, yes, my mantra is the most powerful mantra on earth." And he leans in to whisper it in my ear, and he says, "Whenever possible, repeat these words. The mantra I give you are the words, thank you." Well, I look at him, I figure he's joking, but he's totally serious. I go, "That's it? I traveled 18,000 miles to get thank you. That's it?"
I
Well,
love
well, he says,
it.
"No, no, no. That's it is the mantra you have been using. That makes you feel like you never have enough. My mantra is thank you, not that's it. That's it will take you nowhere." So I'm totally pissed off. So I say, "Well, thanks for nothing." And he says, "Thanks for nothing is not the mantra. You must say it from your heart many times a day. So when you eat good food, say
Yes.
thank you. Or
Thank you.
when you see your child or your sunset or your pet, say thank you from your heart. And soon you'll feel gratitude."
Nice.
Well, I'm still pissed off, but I figure if I travel all that way, I'll give it a shot.
You
So,
might as well use it.
I
Yeah.
leave the ashram, I enter a taxi that has air conditioning. And like in here, it's about 105 degrees, and in India, it was 105. And I say, "Oh, thank you for the air conditioning." And then, I go to my hotel room. There's a bottle of clean water. I say, "Thank you for the water." And then I open up my computer. I mean, these are amazing machines. Thank you for that.
Mhm,
Each time feeling
mhm,
my heart and then saying thank you to the universe, I Skype my wife, thank you for Skype. My wife shows up, I say thank you for my wife, and tears roll down my face because I realize that we're
mm,
surrounded by so much. And my wife says,
mhm.
that must have been some mantra he gave you. And I said, you have no idea. But,
That's a great
5
story that you just
seconds of feeling your
yeah,
gratitude for all the things in our lives, doing that 20 times a day can tap you into a totally different
that's right.
state of consciousness.
I believe it. And that idea that gratitude is the doorway is profound because, the soul or the spirit, is considered to reside in the heart.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about, and so you can't have awakening. Well, let me put it this way: awakening certainly leads to heart opening, or you might even say heart opening leads to awakening, or they have to happen. They're kind of like hand in the glove because without that, you're just stuck in your head.
Right.
And the brain, as powerful it is the source of basically not being present because it's always going to keep you in a past or a future state, right? You're always going to be because our entire construct of the world is based on memory.
Hmm.
And so when an event happens, we immediately either store it as memory, and then we go back in our memory and we try to relate it to past constructs and events that happen. And then immediately we moved from the present into the past. And then when we ruminate about the future, we're basically projecting memory into the future. And so we're not in the present. But the heart has no capacity to be anywhere but the present.
Yeah.
And so when you have a practice like your thank you mantra and you continue that process of opening the heart, then that feeling of being, radically accepting, present, and love starts to flow. And I think that's really where that transformation begins
Yeah. They call
in
it
the
the
heart,
present because it's a gift. And when you are
right?
acknowledging that gift and relaxing into that gift rather than listening to the mind, which is basically a constant complainer, you know,
Hmm.
uh, then you
Yeah.
start to open up to these other energies of love, bliss, peace.
Right.
And as you said, it's kind of a retraining. And when you have the right training tool, it's not that
Hmm.
hard.
Jesus teaches that another master key is forgiveness,
Hmm.
which is love in action, right? Giving forward of your grace, right?
Yeah.
First to yourself and then to others. So those are really powerful practices. You've already described two. One is the mantra of thank you, and then your gratitude meditation, which is profound. What are some of the others that you
Hmm.
have kind of come across in some of these interviews that have been really,
Well, one of them, which I mentioned quickly
effective?
earlier, was that I wrote a list of all the people I've ever loved, and I spend a minute thinking about
Right.
what I love about them and sending them love, and that surrounds you in
Mhm.
love for an hour or whatever. That's very powerful.
I love that.
um, One of them is and people can do it right as I speak right now, as I say, okay, what am I aware of? And it might be I'm aware of some problem or story in my head. Okay, I'm aware that I need to do all these things today. And then I say, what else is there? Well, I'm aware of sitting on this chair, which is comfortable and warm. And what else is going on? And I'm aware that I'm talking. And then
Hmm.
can I also include that I'm aware of these things? Can I include that I'm
Hmm.
also an awareness? So you start with what
Hmm.
you're kind of focused
Hmm.
on, and then you kind of zoom out into
Hmm.
your moment to moment sensations and more of what's going on, and include that you are an awareness. I call that the include
Yeah,
technique.
I love that. That's similar to I have a practice we teach where you move from thinking
Hmm.
to metacognizing. So
Hmm.
metacognizing is the capacity to think about your thinking, to witnessing, which is basically being aware of your thinking about your thinking.
Hmm.
So another way to say this is that thinking is one level of mind, maybe that you consider that the lowest level. And then consciousness is the cognition of your thinking.
Hmm.
And then awareness is the cognition of cognizing consciousness itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I just said the same thing that you described, just using different terms, and I find that it's helpful for people to because they have different, like we said earlier in the podcast, different understandings of the words, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
So you can use multiple different perspective or words to describe the same thing, and you heard that through 100 different interviews, right? They use different words to describe a similar experience.
Yeah, yeah. I have a podcast myself called Awareness Explorers, and I interview all these
Mm,
different teachers, and it's helpful to hear it from different ways of wording things
right.
because some of them will resonate and some won't. Just like some religions might resonate, or some techniques might resonate, and some won't. And I tell people, as a seeker, what you're seeking is what really resonates with you. And
That's right.
and once you find a teacher or a book or something that resonates with you, then you have a friend for life.
That's right. We talked briefly about religion, but what are some of the benefits to being, an adherent, and what are some of the limitations?
Well, every religion has a dogma, which basically says this is the best way or only way, which is unfortunate.
Right. Hmm. Right.
But think of the different religions as different approaches, or different types of food. It's not like
Hmm.
there's broccoli is the only good food for you. There's a lot of different types of food that all can nourish the soul. And I think of the different
Right.
religions as, you know, you want your protein or your steak, and that's one
Hmm.
type, and you want your vegetables and you want your carbohydrates. And the different religions are really different approaches to uh, uh, unleash your true nature. And I found that
Hmm.
at different points in my life, different religions and different approaches really spoke to me. Um,
Hmm.
and luckily, they also have a support group. So if you find that Buddhism really works for you, you hang out with other Buddhists, and that support can be really helpful as well.
Right. Yeah, I think I like that, and I think the dogma, it can be a limitation. I think also believing that the path is external through the institution is a limitation,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? Because ultimately, like we said, Sadguru or the inner guru is the ultimate guide, right? So his idea of God being out there, something that, you need an intermediary versus God being in here that only I can access and have a relationship with.
Yeah.
And I think
All
those,
of all of these
that's the difference between, say, spirituality and religion per se.
all these religions kind of have a surface level where you have to
Right.
look at to somebody first, but I think ultimately their goal is that you would, through their community, through their teachings, that you would find that still small voice within so you can self-guide yourself.
Yeah. I would say that's true of the original teachings. But over the centuries and ages, a lot of those original teachings have become obscured
Hmm.
and also a little bit bastardized for the benefit of the institution.
Yep.
But that's my point of view. Not everyone would agree with me, especially those institutions.
Right, right.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk these days, in the last 20 years with the New Age movement and everything about you know powers such as um, psychic abilities or channeling and
Hmm.
et cetera, or even occult or what the term occult just means hidden, but the word was co-opted to mean negative or dark powers. What for those who are worried about or concerned or even looking for psychic abilities through a spiritual practice, what do you say about that in your and what was your experience with that, and how would you is that good or is it something to be avoided?
Well, the question is, can your ego handle it? I've known gurus that had
Yes,
powers, some very intense powers, and they seem to abuse them. And then I've known gurus
that's
that
right.
had intense powers and they almost never used them because they didn't want anybody to know. So on my path,
Right.
certain weird things did start to happen. And at one
Hmm.
time, it was a problem for me. I used them to like
Hmm.
impress women. Not
Hmm.
not the highest use of those
No,
those things,
no.
but
But we have seen a lot of, like you said, a lot of spiritual teachers have succumbed to that,
Yeah, yeah.
Shaktipat kind of sexual energy that they develop, and then they take a big fall. So that speaks to the need to do check your ego,
Mhm.
right? Because true humility is the non-attachment to feeling like those powers are you, make you special.
Right.
But also the need to do the emotional development, which is something you address. I was really happy to see that, overcoming childhood trauma and your blind spots and letting go of those triggers. It's kind of like Ken Wilber coming out and saying, yeah, wake up, grow up, and show up, but you also have to clean
Clean
up,
up, yeah.
right? Clean up. I
And
think that's an important point. And if you don't clean up, then when these special powers start showing up for you, whether it means that you're starting to hear the voice of a non-physical teacher or something, and you're like, "Wow, look how special I am," it's because you haven't cleaned up, and your ego is still really attached to identity.
right. So in the Enlightenment Project, I try to talk about some cleanup methods because I think a lot of the people who go into spirituality, me included, originally, want to kind of use spiritual bypassing, like don't want to admit that they have
Right?
all
I
that
love that
stuff.
term.
I just want to
Right?
tap into bliss. But
Right?
part of the spiritual process is you are trying to become as pure a vessel for these higher energies to move
Hmm.
through you. And if you have a lot of
Right?
stuff from your past that has not been cleaned up, it's going to show up eventually in some kind of problem.
That's right.
And
100%.
even getting help from your friends. Hey, let me know if you see anything off because I'm trying
Hmm.
to clean this stuff up and I can't always see it myself. So having a group or some friends that can keep you honest is really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I've had exposure to Kundalini yoga and Wim Hof. I did a podcast with Wim Hof, the breathing guy, and I had to actually pause afterwards and record a warning to people. I
Mhm.
say, this is a super hyper arousal, intense breathing practice that's moving a ton of energy. And if your mind isn't ready for it, be very careful with this.
Yeah.
And a lot of yogis blew a gasket in their brains with not using the right breathing practices or not being balanced in their pranayama practice. And there's examples of Kundalini practitioners, having a sudden Kundalini awakening, and their body and brain were not ready for it,
Hmm.
right? And so they kind of blew a gasket. They were not acting anymore like you and I would consider to be sane. So I wanted to just address those kind of like extreme practices and also include psychedelics in here, because I'm not suggesting that breathing or even a Kundalini or Kriya yoga practice or even the use of psychedelics are bad per se. But if that's your only thing, or if you do it to an extreme, right, or if you do it with unskilled teachers, then they can be dangerous, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's why I have some chapters about that in the Enlightenment Project where I talk about how to use these powerful energies, whether they be plant medicines or Kundalini, and how to be careful with them, how to avoid abusing them, how to possibly make use of
Mhm.
them. And
Right.
people don't talk about that much. And there is a big possibility of abuse if you're not careful. So that's why I included a lot of information about that. And but plant medicines and Kundalini have all been great aids, and if you use them carefully, it can be really helpful additions on the path.
I write that, especially what you just said. They're kind of additions. They're support mechanisms to move some energy, to clear up some chakra energy, and I mean, I love this idea that there's no one practice for anybody, one individual, and there's not any one practice for you for your entire life. Because as you change, your practice will need to change.
Yeah.
And I think that's profound. Like as you unlock a pattern or a trigger or a samskara, then you shift your practice to really focus on letting go of that. And once that's cleared up, you might go more to a traditional, back to your gratitude practice or something like that until the next samskara or, you know, hidden trauma pops up and rears its little fangs. And then you got to deal with that. So I love this idea that a practice is ebbing and flowing with the seasons of your life and with the ups and downs and with what's showing up in your life. And also, and I know we've got to wrap up here soon, but we started this conversation with you placing a call and getting Mother Teresa on the phone, and she says, "Well, I don't meditate." And so a lot of people are thinking, "Well, geez, like she's a saint, like she's an advanced spiritual practitioner." But she found it through her dharma path, or her, her um, her calling, I guess, her mission,
Mhm.
her service. And so that's another really powerful path in and of itself, is just to do what you're meant to do and do it with your full being, with love,
Yeah, she said, "It
right?
doesn't matter what you do, all that matters is how much love you bring to it."
Ooh, that's amazing. So what if someone listening says, "That sounds great, Jonathan, but I don't know what my calling is."
Well, here's a metaphor I use is that you remember the hot and cold game you play as a kid? Somebody hides a pen and they tell you if you're getting warmer or cooler as you approach it.
Yeah,
Well,
of
imagine the
course. Yeah.
universe is playing the hot and cold game with us. If you keep taking small steps, the universe will say if you're getting warmer or cooler. If something feels right, that's warmer. If you get great results, that's warmer. If something feels boring or meaningless, that's cooler. So I think if you listen to the messages you're getting from your life as you take small steps, you can soon find, oh, this seems to be where it's saying, I'm red hot, baby, go in that direction. I was
Right.
a uh, had a different career, but the first thing I wrote landed me on Oprah. So that was the
Nice.
universe saying, "You're red hot, baby.
That was red
Maybe
hot.
maybe you should be a writer." You know,
That's awesome. I love it.
I
That's
never had
really
the idea
awesome.
I'd be a writer, but that was a pretty clear message. And I've done other things, and the message was, "Wow, that feels terrible, and I'm not getting any results." That's the universe saying, "You're freezing, baby. Go somewhere else."
That's back to that inner guidance system we talk about.
Exactly.
If it feels good, you're getting hot.
Uh-huh.
If it feels bad, you're getting cold. I love that. So this is probably, I mean, that's like to me the foundation of what you call creating your own enlightenment project,
Hmm.
which is the title of your book. First is kind of move toward the hot, right? To find your calling so you can live that calling with love. And what are other aspects or attributes of creating your own enlightenment project, creating your own sadhana or practice?
Well, I think having the right attitude, like you're a scientist experimenting to see what works for you. I call it experimental
Mm-hmm.
attitude. I'm going to try this for a month, see if that works. I'm going to try that for a month,
Mm-hmm.
see if that works. And then when you find something, really, go deep with it. That's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think, um, finding books or teachers that inspire you, a group that inspires you, that you can share stuff with.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I have a website, the enlightenmentproject.net, in which I give for free my five favorite methods for quieting the mind in under a minute. And I think
Nice.
trying different methods and seeing, oh, that one really worked for me. I'm going to use that one. And
Mm-hmm.
that can be very helpful in moving your enlightenment project forward. So, people
Mm-hmm.
can go to that website and download that for free and see if
Mm-hmm.
something there is like, oh, that's something that I know quiets my mind. And the quieter your mind is, the more you're going to be able to awaken, the more you're going to be able to hear your own guidance.
Right. I totally agree with that. And I think one distinction I would like to make is I think it's important to, you may try a number of things, but if something feels kind of close, it's important to stick with it for some time
Hmm.
and to not chase the shiny bouncing ball. And I think a lot of people will do that. Even some of these apps, meditation apps, right? So if you do a different technique every day, your mind is kind of like getting trained in different ways and it's getting bounced around, and you're not really making any significant progress
Hmm.
so you really need to find a technique that resonates and then stick with it for some time. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, that's why I spent 18 years living with a teacher. Once I found
That's
something
true.
that really worked for me, it's like, okay, I'm going to go deep here. But a lot of
Right.
people are only exposed to one or two things, and those things really don't resonate, and then they stay with that. So I
Right.
say at first, you really have to try a bunch of stuff. Then, once
Yeah.
you've done that for a bit, then choose, okay, where am I going to go? Where am I going to plant my flag and go deep with?
Yeah. And so someone's listening and say, "Great, what's a great place? What's the best way to start?" I guess besides going, and in addition to going to the enlightenedproject.net and learning, what your top 5 techniques are. How else does someone like start along this path?
Um, well, podcasts like yours or mine, where they're
Mhm.
listening to different teachers and getting
Mhm.
inspired. I think, that's a great way. My podcast is Awareness Explorers. And,
Mhm.
if you can find a teacher or group that you resonate with, that support, you tend to become like the people you hang out with. So I try to hang out with
Right.
the highest beings I possibly can, hoping that some of that will rub
Mhm.
off on me. So I think
That's great.
um, that's a next step in a person's enlightenment project, is finding the group or the people that you resonate with, and hopefully then you can launch
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, they make them your team or tribe, or
Yeah.
what the Buddhists would call us your sadhana, your practice group.
Hmm.
Your community of practice would be the academic term. I mean, it doesn't matter, but I agree with you. You gotta it takes a team to really evolve as a whole person, I
It
think.
does.
I love that.
I can end with a story. You mentioned earlier Ramana Maharshi, um,
Mhm.
and his "Who Are You" technique. I was in India visiting a guru named Punjaji. You might have heard of him. He was a student of
Mhm.
Ramana Maharshi. And when I got there, he told me to sit in front of him. I didn't know anything about him, so I sit in front of him, and he gets up close to me. And he says, "Who are you?" And since I didn't know anything about this technique, I said, "I'm Jonathan Robinson from the United States." And he just started laughing. He thought that was hysterically funny. And then finally he said, "No, who are you really?" And I said, "I guess I'm a writer." And he kind of shook his head, no. I said, "Oh, I guess I'm an American." No. "I guess I'm a spiritual seeker." No. I went through like 20 different roles. He wasn't having any of it. Finally, I just quieted and looked in his eyes, which were like beams of light coming out of. And
Right.
as I let go of all those roles, I realized I'm just a presence. And I was like
Yeah.
eye to eye with him. And then this wave of love just hit me. And it was so powerful that I just started crying in his lap. And as I'm crying in
Mhm.
his lap, feeling all this love and peace, he taps me on the head and says, "This love and this peace you feel now, that's who you really
That's what
are. And your job in life is
uh-huh.
to get back to that place as soon as you can." And that
I love it.
always hit me, like that's our job in life. And
Right.
when you do that, not only do you serve yourself, but you serve the world and the people you care about.
Um, awesome. Yeah. Let's end on that. Thank you, Jonathan Robinson. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for your work with the Enlightenment Project and what you've written and contributed and what you will in the future
Hmm.
on our way back to joy and peace
It's been a great pleasure, Mark.
with an
Thanks
open
for
heart.
having me.
Yeah. Thank you very much.